Hey guys, we're going to get started today by talking about the Treaty of Versailles and then the economy between the wars. So what's happening with the economy between World War One and World War Two, and what the Treaty of Versailles has to do with all that. Okay, so we're going to do a quick overview of World War One, as you know, as we just talked about the beginning, and then the propaganda and a little bit about the war itself. Um, but so we're going to do a little bit of overview about the war, and then we're going to go into the how that connects to what happens at the end of the war and then after the war. So World War One was fought between the Allies and the Central Powers from 1914 to 1918. So remember, we had the Allies, which was which was the Triple Entente of France, Great Britain. Um, I shouldn't do this if I can't remember it off the top of my head. Russia, sorry, France, Great Britain, Russia in the in the Triple Entente, and then you have the Triple Alliance, which was, or sorry, the Triple Alliance becomes the Central Powers, which was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And the Ottoman Empire joined up with the Central Powers as well. But remember, Italy switched sides, and they went from being part of the Triple Alliance to, yeah, there we go, Triple Alliance to joining the Allies. So joining that former Triple Entente alliance, joining the Allies, because they wanted to get some land from Austria-Hungary after the war. Okay, so that's kind of what was going on in World War One. Then on November 11th, 1918, the German government agreed to an armistice, and World War One came to an end. An armistice is just like a ceasefire, to stop fighting. There's no peace treaty that would bring lasting peace. Just an agreement to stop fighting. So World War One officially came to an end on November 11th, 1918. We celebrate this day still today. It used to be called Armistice Day because that's when the war ended and the ceasefire happened. But now November 11th is Veterans Day. So instead of just celebrating the end of World War One, it's celebrating veterans from all wars instead. Okay, so to recap World War One, and this, like, because we haven't done this before yet. World War One was the largest, most deadly, and most destructive war that the world had yet seen. That's why this is so important, is because up to this point, this is the largest war, the most deadly war, the most destructive war, um, in world history. 8.5 million soldiers and 13 million civilians died as a result of the war. Um, so, so large amounts of people dead, and then and as you can see from the chart here, it's pretty well split between all the different powers. Um, the United States obviously came in later, so that, near the end of the war, so there aren't as many casualties on the, or at least battlefield deaths on the American side. And Germany had the most, but you've got quite a few that are pretty close to the same amount there. Here we go there. So you can see some pictures of the war there. 21 million soldiers were also wounded during the war, so not just the ones that died, but 21 million soldiers were wounded as well. You can see the one on the right there. Is a survivor of, I believe this is uh, uh, a gas attack. So you can see, a large portion of his face is missing from that. I think that's the same person in both pictures. So homes, farms, town, and whole towns were destroyed. The war cost $338 billion, and most national treasuries were empty after the war. And this is $338 billion 100 years ago, over 100 years ago. So that's huge amounts of money. And most of the countries were out of money by the end of the war. You can see a whole city destroyed right there. Which if you've seen World War One movies, you've probably seen stuff like this before. I know 1917, which is a fantastic World War One movie. Um, is it has some scenes that look very close to this. All right, in 1919, representatives from 32 nations attended the Paris Peace Conference to write a treaty to end the war. So there's a ceasefire, but the war's not officially over because there's not a lasting peace until much later. Um, so the representatives from these 32 nations attend the Paris Peace Conference. They want to write a treaty to end the war, to get both sides together and come to an agreement here. Now, we'll see in a second. It's not really both sides making this treaty, but you'll see that in a second. So the conference was led by the Big Four: Britain, France, Italy, and the United States. Russia had dropped out of the war because of the Russian Revolution, which we'll get to soon, I believe. But Russia had already dropped out of the war, so they were not. They made a separate peace with Germany, so they were not a part of the Treaty of Versailles. But Britain, France, the United States, who came into the war later, they're big there. And remember, Italy switched sides, so they're one of the Big Four as well. So neither Germany nor any of the Central Powers were allowed to attend. Germany did not go to the Paris Peace Conference. None of the Central Powers were there. It was just essentially the winners deciding what they wanted to do with their victory and what the peace treaty would entail. So Russia could not attend because they already quit World War One. Like I said, the Russian Revolution happens, and they drop out of the war because of that. All right. So they're trying to create a treaty between these major powers, but creating a treaty, even though they're all on the same side of the war, wouldn't be easy because the major powers had different agendas. So you have the British, the French, the Italians, and the United States. But let's see what they wanted. Britain and France wanted to weaken Germany so it could never go to war again. Okay, they wanted to make sure that Germany wouldn't come back to bite them. So they wanted to essentially punish Germany for the war. Now, if you think about this, if you think back, Germany, you could make an argument maybe started the war, but it was really, like we said, it was the main the main causes. It was the militarism, which Germany was a part of that, sure. It was the alliances, but that was pretty much everyone involved. It was the imperialism. Sure, Germany was involved in that too, but a bunch of other people were too. And then the nationalism. Yeah, Germany was a huge part of that, but so were all these other nations. So, so if as far as the main causes that we talked about, everyone's pretty much equally to blame here. However, the British and the French don't see it that way. They see, Germany Germany caused this war because they blamed them for essentially letting Austria-Hungary letting Austria-Hungary go to war with Serbia in the first place. So Germany, they saw as the real villains here. They wanted to make sure that they were punished. Britain and France wanted Germany to accept full blame, pay reparations, and lose all their overseas colonies. Okay, so these are the punishments they want for the Germans. Accept full blame for the war, that they started the war essentially by themselves, which is not how it happened. To pay reparations, pay back Britain, France, the other countries that they went to war with, to pay for the war, and they wanted Germany to lose all their overseas colonies in Africa, in the Pacific, in China. All those overseas colonies go back, or I guess they would go to the British and the French. Pretty much is what they want to happen. Okay. The U.S. President Woodrow Wilson disagreed with these harsh punishments for Germany. So Woodrow Wilson said, hey, these harsh punishments are not what we need right now. We need something else, and he has his own plan that he sets out for that. So he presented his own peace proposal. Whoops, sorry about that. Known as sorry, let me do this while we're at it, known as the 14 points. Okay, so his 14 points is his plan, and we'll talk about what that is real quick. All right, I'm going to summarize the 14 points instead of going through all 14. So points 1 through 5, Wilson hoped to eliminate the causes of World War I, the main causes. He called for an end to secret treaties, the alliances, freedom of the seas, meaning that you could pretty much go wherever you want. Boats can go wherever they want instead of having to worry about national territory in the waters and stuff like that, because the German U-boats attacking British and American ships is really what, I guess mainly British ships, is what is really what caused the U.S. to enter the war in the first place. Eliminating imperial colonies. So you wanted to get rid of all imperial colonies. No one has colonies anymore, which I guess would have included the United States. And he wanted to reduce national military. So look, these are the four main causes of World War I in points 1 through 5 right here, right? He wanted to, no treaties, reduce national militaries, end imperial colonies. Okay, the nationalism, I guess, is the only one that's not talked about in here. So he wants to actually get at the main causes, as we talked about. Points 6 through 13, Wilson suggesting changing national boundaries, creating new nations. Hey, this is getting at the nationalism part, and allowing self-determination so that the people of each nation could decide their own form of government. Hey, this solves the nationalism portion of the main causes of World War I. This sounds great. Sounds like a great plan, right? And point 14 was Wilson wanted a League of Nations. Okay, this League of Nations would give all nations an opportunity to work out their grievances without resorting to war. It's sort of like would create an international court to adjudicate decisions between nations and things like that, where the nations could get together and make decisions, and not everything has to be a war. So Wilson hoped that a League of Nations could peacefully negotiate solutions to future conflicts instead of just resulting in war every single time. Okay, so that was what Wilson wanted, the League of Nations, and then he wanted to solve those main causes of World War I. Britain and France disagreed with many of the 14 points, as they would, because for one, they had a whole bunch of imperial colonies that they wouldn't want to give up, and they wanted to punish Germany, so that didn't really work with their plan. So Woodrow Wilson had to compromise, and these compromises led to an agreement known as the Treaty of Versailles. It's called the Treaty of Versailles because it was done in Paris at the Palace of Versailles. League of Nations. These were the major provisions of the Versailles Treaty. The first one is a League of Nations that would serve as an international organization to keep peace among nations. Okay, so Wilson gets his League of Nations that he wanted. The League Covenant also included an agreement that all member nations would work together to stop future acts of aggression. So again, trying to adjudicate decisions within within the League of Nations instead of resorting to war. And the League also included a court of international justice to settle disagreements. So this is kind of the beginnings of international law with the League of Nations. But the terms of the treaty also severely punished Germany as well. So Germany had to give up land in Europe and all of its overseas colonies. So maybe a little bit of the nationalism issues getting dealt with here, and at least Germany loses all their overseas colonies. Britain and France don't. So that's something, I guess. The German military was reduced to 100,000 troops, 6 warships, no submarines, and could not manufacture war equipment. So we're reducing military, but only in Germany. And so again, harsh, severe punishments to Germany for this. And Germany was forced to sign the War Guilt Clause, accepting all blame for the war and pay $33 billion in reparations to the Allies. Okay. So they had to pay $33 billion to the Allies over a certain period of time, which they're going to have to borrow money to do because they're out of money too, and uh, they had to uh, essentially sign this clause saying that they were the ones responsible for the war, and that they're going to pay all this back, right? So um, so you can look at it in a couple different ways. You can look at it as, well, Wilson got the League of Nations, and at least Germany, some of this stuff happened that he wanted to happen to everybody, or you can look at it as, well, the Britain and France wanted to punish Germany anyway. So really, all Woodrow Wilson got out of this was the League of Nations. Um, so not the greatest compromise in history. Uh, the Britain and France got what they wanted pretty much. The United States really didn't. Um, so in addition, the Treaty of Versailles redrew the map of Europe and the Middle East. So you can see the map in 1915 versus 1919. The Austro-Hungarian Empire is broken up into a whole bunch of different pieces. Germany is smaller. New nations are created in Eastern Europe out of Russia. So Russia lost some land there, um, uh, and then the a bunch of countries in Eastern Europe are broken apart, made smaller. The Ottoman Empire falls, so they're replaced by Turkey. All these changes are happening. Um, all these changes are happening in Europe based on the Treaty of Versailles. So it's redrawing the map of Europe. Central Europe was redrawn to reduce the power of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Land was taken from Germany to create Poland, and the German-French border was demilitarized to avoid a future invasion. So in other words, there's this part of Germany called the Rhineland, where Germany cannot have any military troops. There's a little green area right here. So they have to demilitarize that zone. They can't have any military troops there, so that it's harder to invade if they wanted to. New nations were created from territories that Russia gave up when it left the war early. So again, Russia loses some stuff there. And one that I didn't mention, the Ottoman Empire was divided. We said that, but Britain and France gained mandates in the Middle East. So Britain and France. In addition to part of the Ottoman Empire, but also parts of Arabia as well, the Britain and France gained territory, essentially gained colonies in the Middle East, which as oil is becoming more important, which is happening right at this point during World War One, oil is becoming super important in the world economy. The oil in the Middle East is going to be that much more valuable, and those mandates in the Middle East are going to be that much more important to Britain and France. Also, colonizing the Middle East. So there are some there's some issues. Oh yeah, mandates gave Britain and France control over oil resources in the Middle East. As you can see, all those oil fields right there, that becomes a thing over the next 100 years. Um, and then on June 28th, 1919, Germany and the major Allied powers signed the Treaty of Versailles, and World War One officially came to an end. Okay? Most nations celebrated the official end of World War One, but Germans protested the harsh terms, and they resented their government for signing the treaty in the first place. So they hate their government, though what's called the Weimar government of Germany, because they they signed this peace treaty and didn't stand up for Germany, and Germany really dealt with a whole bunch of crap, if I can say that, over the next 20 years. That was eventually taken advantage of when Adolf Hitler comes to power, which we'll get to another day. So in the United States, reactions to the to the Treaty of Versailles were mixed. According to the U.S. Constitution, only the Senate can approve treaties. So Woodrow Wilson couldn't approve the treaty by himself. The Senate had to. And many senators feared that signing the treaty and joining the League would force America to become involved in future wars. That if they become part of the League of Nations, that that they're going to have to get involved in these European wars, and in the future. America was very isolationist at this point. We like with the United States like to keep to itself in foreign affairs, which obviously lots of trade, but as far as getting involved in foreign wars, um, we like to keep to ourselves for the most part. Obviously, there's some there's some there's some exceptions to that, but but as a result, the United States never signed the treaty, never signed the Treaty of Versailles, even though Woodrow Wilson was the president, was a huge part of it, and they never joined the League of Nations because the Senate never signed the treaty. So the League of Nations, which is which was kind of Woodrow Wilson's brainchild, did not actually did not actually happen in the United States. We did not actually join it because the Senate really didn't agree with what the president wanted. So as a result, the United States never signed the treaty, never joined the League of Nations. I just said that. Now, World War I was the largest war that the world had yet seen, and it changed the way future wars were fought. We talked about earlier total war tactics. They used total war tactics to commit all their resources to winning. They drafted soldiers, rationed, used propaganda like we saw earlier. Um, and new war technologies increase the rates of death and destruction to unprecedented levels. So you have more death and destruction than ever before. War changed forever after World War One. The war changed expectations for women and led to voting rights for women in many nations because women, as men went to war, women did a lot more. In society back home, especially like economically, having jobs in factories and stuff like that. So the social capital that gained for women that they were able to use to push for voting rights in many nations, including the United States. I think Australia was the first one to to gain voting rights for women. Um, yeah. 22 million soldiers and civilians died in the war. An entire generation of Europeans was killed. Many places in Europe were destroyed. Um, and the war devastated the economies of European nations who had little money to rebuild and few jobs to offer citizens. So in Europe, things are terrible after the war. They they don't have much money. They're not able to rebuild because they don't have any money to rebuild. They didn't really have any jobs. Economically, World War One devastates the economies of Europe. Um, so also also the terms of the Versailles Treaty caused problems and bitterness in many nations, especially Germany. Um, so the Treaty of Versailles was said to be a peace built on quicksand. It's a peace, but it's not going to last very long because it created all these problems and all the bitterness in especially in Germany after it. The treaty did not address the main cause of World War One as Wilson's plan um, would have. And the League of Nations did not include the United States, and its leaders would do nothing or would do anything to avoid another war. So the League of Nations was weaker because, for one, the United States wasn't in it, and the United States is coming out of World War One is becomes the major power in the world. Um, and the leaders of these nations are basically going to do anything they can to avoid another war. So they're not going to do the things that are necessary in order to create a lasting peace. So they're just going to give in to whatever people want because they don't want to start a war. Then high unemployment and a desire for revenge would lead to aggressive dictators in the 1920s and the 1930s. Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini are two of the best examples of that. Okay. Do I want to do this? Yeah, I'm trying to figure out. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Okay. Actually, you know what? No. I'm gonna do this later. Okay. So I'm gonna make another video so that we can do this next part. Okay. So watch the next video.